What if the man who gave up everything for love was told he was nothing more than a stepping stone? It was supposed to be a quiet afternoon. The air in Montecito hung heavy, as it always did in summer, with a gentle breeze rustling through the orange groves outside the lavish mansion that had come to symbolize Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's attempt at a fairy tale life in America. But behind the white-trimmed French doors, inside that carefully curated sanctuary of privacy, serenity shattered into a million irreparable pieces. What started as a personal disagreement between husband and wife soon spiraled into a psychological implosion, so disturbing that it left one of the world's most recognizable men sedated, hospitalized, and isolated. Cut off not just from the outside world, but, perhaps more alarmingly, from himself. Before we continue, please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for updates. That man was Prince Harry. And what broke him was not just the burden of being born royal, nor the chaos of the relentless media machine. It wasn't the weight of years of scrutiny, or even the trauma of his mother's death echoing through his adult life. No, what fractured Harry that day, according to sources close to the Sussex inner circle, was a single sentence spoken during an argument so vicious, so emotionally annihilating, that it chilled the bones of the housekeeper who overheard it from the hallway. "You were just my stepping stone to Hollywood power." The words came from Meghan Markle. Delivered with ice-cold detachment, they landed like daggers in the room. And for Harry, already teetering on the edge of mental exhaustion, they were the final push off a cliff he'd been clinging to for years. The confrontation that followed was not only emotionally destructive but would end in a medical emergency, with the Duke of Sussex found locked in a bathroom, curled up on the tiled floor in total silence, unresponsive. Emergency responders would later describe the scene as severe emotional trauma, a term they rarely apply to individuals in the public spotlight. This was not just a marital fight. It was not a spat between frustrated spouses. It was the culmination of years of internalized pain, public humiliation, private regret, and a long-brewing identity crisis colliding with the brutal realization that the woman Harry had defended against his family, his homeland, and the press may never have loved him in the way he believed. At least not for who he was, but for what he was. The aide who overheard the fight wasn't a long-time insider or deeply embedded staff member. She was a temporary replacement for a traveling housekeeper, brought in to fill a gap while the Sussex couple entertained guests earlier that week. But her account, which has since leaked to both royal watchers and news agencies under the promise of anonymity, described the moment as chilling and deeply disturbing. Her words, "I heard shouting. I didn't intend to listen, but I froze when I heard Meghan say those words. I couldn't move. It didn't even sound like a fight. It sounded like an execution." According to her, what followed was silence. Then a door slam. Then another. Then Harry's voice, quiet at first, then raised in a mix of anguish and disbelief. "How could you say that to me? After everything?" The words, muffled through walls and echoing down hallways, were filled with heartbreak more than anger. That was when Harry reportedly disappeared into the en-suite bathroom and didn't come out. An hour passed. Then another. At some point, staff reportedly tried to knock. No answer. Eventually, one of Harry's personal security aides, having received a call from a concerned staff member, unlocked the door. Inside, they found the prince slumped against the bathtub, pale, shaking, and disoriented. Sources close to the situation claim that Harry had not taken any drugs or alcohol. He was simply catatonic, overwhelmed, and emotionally short-circuited. Medics were called not out of fear of overdose, but because he had entered a state of severe dissociation. The responders believed he was in emotional shock. Paramedics administered a sedative after consultation with a psychiatric advisor over the phone. Meghan, reportedly, was not present when the emergency team arrived. Some sources say she left during or after the argument. Others say she was upstairs in another part of the house and chose not to interfere. When news of the incident reached the royal family, still thousands of miles away in the UK, it set off a chain reaction of panic and furious silence. King Charles, reportedly on holiday at the time, was informed within the hour. Prince William, too. An insider revealed that William had a brief but urgent call with Harry's medical team and was said to be deeply shaken. The two brothers have been estranged, but William was heard saying, "This was never supposed to go this far." And yet, it had. All the carefully constructed bridges burned. The independence Harry had fought for now seemed like a cruel illusion. The fairy tale was cracking at the edges, and beneath the glossy photos and public smiles lay a foundation of resentment, miscommunication, and now, psychological collapse. This hospitalization wasn't just a personal health scare, it became a public relations nightmare. Archwell, the nonprofit and media company Harry and Meghan co-founded, went into damage control. Their PR team issued no statement, but staff were instructed to deny and deflect. Netflix executives were reportedly alarmed, having invested millions in the Sussex's brand, only to discover it might be fracturing from within. But the public didn't need a press release. News spreads fast in Hollywood. Within days, murmurs of a Sussex emergency reached online gossip boards, entertainment insiders, and eventually tabloids. The story warped as it traveled. Some claimed Harry had overdosed, others said he had run away. But the truth, as confirmed by multiple insiders close to both the Sussex household and medical sources, was perhaps more haunting. Prince Harry had broken, not physically, not chemically, but emotionally. And the catalyst, all accounts suggest, was the woman he had given everything up for. This wasn't the first sign of strain between the couple. In fact, recent public appearances had sparked speculation. Harry often appeared distracted. Photos captured at high-profile events showed him looking distant, sometimes disengaged. Body language analysts pointed out subtle tension. Meghan often walked several steps ahead, rarely looking back. Their hand-holding, once their public trademark, had become intermittent. Whispers grew louder. And now, it appeared those whispers had substance. What does it mean for a man to give up a crown, a country, and a centuries-old identity, only to realize he might have been a pawn in someone else's game? What happens when the man the world thought was escaping royal restrictions for love discovers he may have stepped into a more suffocating trap? The situation now is tense. Buckingham Palace, as expected, has remained silent. No formal statements. No confirmations. But royal aides have been seen shuttling between Clarence House and the palace more frequently. Meghan, meanwhile, has resumed solo outings, paparazzi capturing her smiling at a Beverly Hills restaurant just 3 days after Harry's hospitalization. Critics accuse her of coldness. Defenders say she's staying strong. But somewhere behind closed doors, Prince Harry is recovering physically perhaps, but emotionally, it's unclear. Insiders report he's undergoing psychiatric evaluation, and some speculate this may be the moment that forces him to rethink his entire life trajectory. Because when someone you love tells you that you were just a stepping stone, it doesn't just sting, it erodes your very sense of self. For Harry, a man already wrestling with identity, legacy, and trauma, those words may not be survivable in the metaphorical sense. And so, as the world watches with bated breath, one question looms over the Montecito Hills and the halls of Buckingham Palace alike. Is this the breaking point for Prince Harry? Or is this the moment he finally reclaims his voice and perhaps his future? The story of Prince Harry's emotional collapse cannot be understood in isolation. It wasn't just one argument or a single sentence that pushed him past the edge. It was a slow, grinding descent that began long before Meghan Markle ever uttered those now infamous words in the Montecito mansion. This is a timeline of unraveling, a meticulously detailed trail of red flags, psychological strain, and subtle breakdowns that were visible to those who knew what to look for. Harry didn't fall overnight. He was falling for years. The beginning of Harry's emotional turbulence traces back to the trauma of his childhood. The death of his mother, Princess Diana, in 1997 when he was just 12, left an open wound that never fully healed. Over the years, Harry himself admitted he buried his pain and bottled up his grief. He didn't cry at the funeral. He didn't talk about her much. Instead, he followed the royal script: smile in public, stay silent in private. This emotional repression became a survival strategy, one that would eventually betray him. Fast forward to adulthood. Harry served in the British Army, completed 2 tours in Afghanistan, and earned the respect of his comrades. The military gave him structure, purpose, and identity outside of royalty. But returning home brought a different kind of war. The British tabloids were merciless. Every date, every drunken night, every misstep was plastered across headlines. Harry began to show signs of anxiety and isolation. He described panic attacks, nights where he would wake up in cold sweats, and a growing sense of being hunted, emotionally and physically, by the press. Then came Meghan. Their love story seemed like redemption. Harry, the wounded prince; Meghan, the American actress and activist. Their engagement in 2017 was hailed as a modern fairy tale. For Harry, Meghan appeared to offer not just companionship, but a ticket out of the royal institution that had long felt suffocating. In Meghan, he saw a partner who was unafraid to challenge tradition, who could help him forge a new path beyond Buckingham Palace. But behind the scenes, pressure mounted quickly. From the very beginning, the British tabloids zeroed in on Meghan's race, background, and Hollywood past. The attacks were relentless, often racially charged, and deeply personal. Harry, still haunted by the media's role in his mother's death, reacted with fury. He issued unprecedented statements condemning the press. He distanced himself from royal correspondence. He began taking legal action. The tension with the press was only escalating, but so was the tension within the royal family. According to multiple sources, senior royals viewed Harry's protective stance toward Meghan as reckless. He was accused of breaking protocol, of being impulsive. William and Harry's relationship began to fray. Behind palace doors, arguments erupted. And Harry, feeling increasingly cornered, made a decision that would alter the course of his life forever, to step down from royal duties. In January 2020, the couple announced they would step back from their roles as senior royals. The world was stunned. The Queen was reportedly blindsided. Charles was furious. William was deeply hurt. And while the public debated the political implications, few saw the psychological cost being paid behind the scenes. Leaving the UK, Harry lost more than just royal titles and taxpayer-funded security. He lost the grounding of familiarity. He lost access to his military affiliations, honors he had earned and cherished. Most critically, he lost structure. Life in Los Angeles and later Montecito was glamorous, but unanchored. No more royal briefings. No military camaraderie. No schedule dictated by royal engagements. Just open space, and that space quickly filled with doubt. Insiders close to the couple described a version of Harry that the public rarely saw. Friends who visited in the early months after their royal exit said Harry struggled with long bouts of melancholy. He missed his family, despite the anger. He missed the sense of duty. He missed the UK, in quiet ways, cricket matches, pub culture, old friends who no longer knew how to talk to him. And Meghan, despite her support in public, reportedly had little patience for Harry's emotional nostalgia. In interviews, Harry began to speak more candidly about mental health. On the Me You Can't See, a documentary he co-produced with Oprah Winfrey, Harry revealed that therapy had become a regular part of his life. He opened up about the trauma of walking behind his mother's coffin. He acknowledged his past anger and even suicidal thoughts. But while this transparency was hailed by mental health advocates, it also stripped away the royal mystique Harry once carried. Now, instead of being a distant prince, he was a man exposing his pain on camera, and not everyone around him embraced this vulnerability. Behind the scenes, things became even more complicated. The couple signed multi-million-dollar deals with Netflix and Spotify. Their brand, once rooted in philanthropy, became increasingly media-driven. Deadlines, production meetings, legal battles, PR chaos. Harry, who once thrived in regiments and rituals, now found himself drowning in scripts and studio notes. His frustration reportedly became visible during filming. Directors described him as cooperative but emotionally unsteady. He would show up withdrawn, then suddenly animated. He was described as intense, reactive, and visibly exhausted. It didn't help that public sentiment began to turn. While the Oprah interview initially garnered sympathy, repeated media appearances eventually sparked backlash. Accusations of hypocrisy, criticizing the media while profiting from exposure, circulated widely. British tabloids struck back with renewed venom. Even in the United States, Meghan and Harry's popularity began to fracture. Polls showed declining support. Harry, once the royal rebel, was now being painted by critics as lost, manipulated, or irrelevant. His relationship with Meghan, at least in public, remained polished. But those close to the couple say signs of strain were becoming more apparent. Meghan took on more public-facing roles, meeting with celebrities, launching ventures, and controlling the brand narrative. Harry, meanwhile, appeared increasingly as a side figure, supportive, but not centered. In internal meetings at Archewell, staff described him as visibly checked out. One former advisor said he showed up, but his mind was always elsewhere. By mid-2023, the cracks deepened. Harry was spotted alone more frequently. Meghan began appearing at red carpet events without him. He traveled to the UK briefly for legal proceedings, but spent no meaningful time with his family. Reports from British press suggested he was desperate for reconciliation but was consistently rebuffed. A friend of Harry's from his army days claimed he's stuck between two worlds and belongs in neither. The turning point came quietly. Late 2023, a cancelled trip. Sources say Harry had planned a surprise solo visit to the UK. He wanted to reconnect, even quietly meet with his brother. Meghan reportedly vetoed the trip. She argued it would damage their narrative. The fight that followed was said to be explosive. And though that moment did not lead to hospitalization, it marked the moment many say Harry lost something more vital than freedom, his sense of autonomy. When 2024 arrived, Harry's behavior shifted again. He began isolating himself more. He grew erratic in meetings. One former Archwell staffer, who later resigned, noted that Harry once arrived at a strategy session visibly agitated and ended it with his head in his hands, refusing to speak. His team began shielding him from interviews. Meghan, according to several sources, started making solo decisions on their business ventures. And yet, through all this, the couple projected unity. They appeared together in curated photos, released statements of solidarity, and continued to frame themselves as victims of a cruel monarchy. But inside, Harry was quietly breaking. He had tried to outrun his trauma by crossing oceans, renouncing titles, and rebuilding a new life. But what he hadn't yet realized was that trauma travels. And now, far from the institution he once blamed, he was confronting a darker truth. The pain didn't come from a crown, it came from within. All of this set the stage for the eventual blow-up that triggered the emergency hospitalization. The years of decline weren't just background. They were the runway to collapse. The childhood trauma, the military transition, the royal exit, the media war, the estrangement from family, the emotional burden of fatherhood, the pressure to perform under the Archwell brand, the public scrutiny, and then Meghan's words, "You were just my stepping stone to power." The phrase didn't land in a vacuum. It landed on the shoulders of a man already crumbling under the weight of unresolved grief, displaced identity, and a gnawing fear that he had sacrificed everything for someone who never saw him as more than a useful name. That fear, that devastating possibility, was not born in that Montecito argument. It was born years earlier and fed by every moment Harry felt unseen, unheard, and unsupported. The hospitalization was merely the inevitable final act of a tragedy unfolding in slow motion. There are moments in every relationship that become irreversible, words spoken that can't be unsaid, glances exchanged that permanently alter the fabric of connection. For Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the night of the verbal explosion inside their Montecito home marked exactly that. A rupture in their marriage that would shake not only the walls of their California estate, but echo into the corridors of royal history. It began like any other evening in the secluded, $14 million mansion nestled in the hills above Santa Barbara. The sun was setting, casting golden shadows across the tiled floors and manicured lawns. Staff had finished dinner service. Security was posted at the perimeter as usual. The mood, according to insiders, was initially calm. Meghan had returned home from a solo outing in Los Angeles, a business meeting reportedly tied to a potential lifestyle brand deal. Harry had spent the afternoon with the children, Archie and Lilibet, playing in the garden and later reading bedtime stories. No one expected what was about to unfold. What triggered the confrontation is still disputed among those close to the couple. One account, from a member of the household staff who spoke on condition of anonymity, claims the fight began when Harry brought up a potential visit to the UK. He wanted to attend a charitable event tied to one of his mother's former causes, an event Princess Diana once championed and which Harry still felt deeply connected to. Meghan, reportedly, pushed back. She questioned the optics. Why travel now? Why reopen wounds? But the disagreement quickly moved beyond scheduling. What had started as a conversation about a trip turned into a referendum on Harry's identity. According to the staff member, Meghan accused Harry of being nostalgic for a life that had already rejected him. She asked why he was still chasing approval from a family that hung him out to dry. Harry, emotionally invested in reconnecting with his roots, grew visibly frustrated. He reportedly said, "It's not about approval. It's about legacy. My mother's legacy." That's when Meghan's tone changed. According to the same staff member, she scoffed. "Your mother's?" The words hung heavy in the air. Harry reportedly froze. His voice, which had been raised a moment before, dropped to a whisper. "You don't mean that." But Meghan didn't back down. "You know what I think? I think you were never cut out for any of this. You never had a plan. You never had the backbone. You were just convenient. You were just my stepping stone to Hollywood power." That sentence, 7 words in total, broke something inside of him. You were just my stepping stone to Hollywood power. The impact was immediate. Harry's face, according to the staffer who was quietly observing from the hallway, went pale. His shoulders slumped. There was no screaming from him. No fight. Just silence. He stared at Meghan, eyes wide, as though he had just witnessed something unspeakable. A moment passed, then another. Without saying a word, he turned and walked away. He didn't go to the kitchen. He didn't go outside. He went into the master bedroom's in-soot bathroom and locked the door. That was around 8:15 p.m. At first, Meghan didn't follow. She remained in the sitting room for another 15 minutes, reportedly pacing back and forth, muttering to herself. Then, with a half-hearted knock, she approached the bathroom door. "Harry." No answer. "Harry, seriously, come out." Still nothing. 20 minutes turned to an hour. By 9:30 p.m., Meghan had retreated upstairs to her own room. According to reports, she called a friend during that time and made no further attempts to speak with Harry. Meanwhile, downstairs, the staff began to grow concerned. The security officer posted near the hallway noted that Harry had not emerged. A housekeeper, attempting to clean up the dining area, noticed the eerie silence and alerted the senior household manager. At 10:12 p.m., a decision was made to call Harry's personal security advisor, a man who had worked with the prince for years and was familiar with his emotional state during previous episodes of distress. He arrived 20 minutes later. The bathroom door was still locked. Using a secondary access key, the advisor let himself in. What he found was harrowing. Harry was lying on the floor in a fetal position, unresponsive. He had not consumed alcohol. No prescription drugs were found. But his breathing was shallow, his face soaked in sweat. His hands trembled. His eyes were open but glazed over. He did not appear to recognize the people in the room. A pulse check showed irregularity, and a medical emergency was declared. By 11 p.m., paramedics from a local emergency unit arrived under a pseudonym request, a protocol reserved for high-profile figures in distress. They administered a mild sedative and placed Harry on oxygen. The attending physician described his condition as an acute emotional dissociation, a psychological state often triggered by extreme mental trauma. Meghan was reportedly informed during the emergency call, but sources say she did not come downstairs. One of the paramedics, according to a leaked statement, described the scene as eerily quiet. The lights were dimmed. No family member hovered nearby. No one wept. We're used to seeing chaos during emergencies, loved ones panicking, crying. But here, it was silence. Cold, eerie silence. It felt like walking into a movie scene where everything's gone wrong, but the cast doesn't know how to react. Harry was transported to a private psychiatric facility affiliated with a Los Angeles medical center known for treating high-profile individuals. He was placed under observation for 72 hours and kept away from the press. The facility used an alias for all admissions involving celebrities. Only 2 visitors were authorized during that time, his personal therapist and his bodyguard. Notably, Meghan did not visit the facility that night or the next. Her absence didn't go unnoticed. By the time news of Harry's hospitalization leaked to a handful of royal reporters in the UK, it had been nearly 4 days. Rumors swirled. Some claimed he had attempted suicide. Others said he had suffered a stroke. The truth, as confirmed by multiple insiders, was neither of those, but equally alarming. Harry had suffered a psychological collapse so intense it required medical sedation and confinement. The public, as always, speculated. But inside the Montecito mansion, the silence remained intact. Staff were told not to discuss the incident. Legal non-disclosure forms were reissued and reinforced. Archewell released no comment. Buckingham Palace offered none either. Only one royal family member is said to have made direct contact, Prince William. According to sources within Kensington Palace, William reached out through a trusted intermediary. His message was brief but heartfelt. "Tell him I'm here when he's ready." Whether or not Harry saw or responded to that message remains unknown. Back at the mansion, Meghan resumed business as usual. She attended a brunch in Beverly Hills 2 days after Harry's hospitalization, dressed in a white designer coat and sunglasses. Photographs show her smiling, engaged in conversation. When asked about Harry by a paparazzo, she remained silent, offering only a slight wave before stepping into her SUV. Some saw this as resilience. Others saw it as chilling. Meanwhile, Harry remained in the facility, undergoing evaluation. Specialists in trauma were brought in. He was reportedly cooperative but quiet. He asked for books. He declined television interviews. He requested privacy and time. By the end of the third day, he had begun to speak more. Therapists noted he described himself as a ghost in his own life. When asked about his marriage, he reportedly said, "I don't know who she is anymore." This was the night it all cracked open. Not just the emotional integrity of a marriage, but the very foundation of Prince Harry's post-royal life. A life built on the promise of freedom, love, and independence, now shaken by words that could not be unsaid and pain that could not be anesthetized. It was not just a breakdown. It was a revelation. The illusion was gone. The cost of exile, the weight of isolation, and the betrayal he felt that night in Montecito might prove too much to walk back from. What happens behind closed doors when the mind can no longer hold back the rising tide? For Prince Harry, the answer came the moment he turned the lock on the bathroom door, sealing himself in with nothing but his thoughts and a lifetime of unresolved trauma. That click, barely audible, wasn't just the sound of a latch falling into place. It was the collapse of a public figure's private world. There were no smashed faces, no broken mirrors, no shouted threats. What happened inside that bathroom was quieter, but far more disturbing. It was a mental and emotional shutdown, total and unrelenting. In the hours that followed Meghan's outburst, the mansion remained deceptively calm. The soft glow of hallway lamps, the whispering of wind through open windows, the occasional hum of electronics in standby mode, all of it painted a false picture of normalcy. But within the confines of the en-suite bathroom, Prince Harry's psyche was folding inward, retreating to a place where pain echoed louder than reason. It's hard to imagine the psychological weight pressing down on him in that moment. The words from Meghan hadn't just been cruel, they had been dismissive of his entire existence, his loyalty, and the sacrifices he had made. "You were just my stepping stone to Hollywood power." The phrase played in loops, looping through his consciousness like a virus he couldn't fight. His mind, already wired with the scars of his past, began to spin. Witnesses who later entered the room described the scene with a haunting stillness. Harry had drawn the curtains. The lights were off. He was seated on the floor, his back against the edge of the bathtub, knees tucked up, chin resting on them. His hands trembled not from any physical illness, but from what psychologists later confirmed was a state of acute emotional shock. A visible tremor ran through his limbs, a neurological symptom of the brain flooding the body with cortisol and adrenaline, unsure whether to flee, fight, or freeze. He had frozen. For over 2 hours, Harry didn't respond to knocks on the door. He didn't speak, didn't cry, didn't make a sound. The staff outside debated what to do. They feared a self-harm incident but heard nothing indicating movement. Still, no one wanted to escalate without certainty. It was only after his longtime personal protection officer arrived that the lock was bypassed. Inside, what they found sent quiet alarm through the mansion. There were no visible injuries, but the psychological picture was grim. The prince was not lucid. He couldn't answer questions. His breathing was shallow, his eyes glassy. He looked through people, not at them. Trauma specialists refer to this state as dissociation, a severe coping mechanism where the brain detaches from the present reality as a form of protection. It often happens when a person cannot process the emotional or psychological pain in real time. In Harry's case, the triggers were layered: betrayal, identity loss, emotional neglect, and an overwhelming sense of helplessness. His body was present, but he was mentally unreachable. Medics on scene administered Ativan, a short-acting benzodiazepine used for acute anxiety and dissociative episodes. The dose was minimal but enough to bring his breathing under control. Still, Harry remained silent, even when his name was spoken softly by his bodyguard. One paramedic, according to later testimony shared confidentially with a journalist, described it this way: "He looked like a man whose tether to the world had been cut. I've seen soldiers come home from war with that same expression. It's not panic. It's emptiness. That's when you know someone's soul has taken a hit too hard to explain." That comparison was not made lightly. Harry's military background gave him a certain resilience. He had seen trauma, but the difference this time was that there was no enemy to point to, no mission to ground him. The battle was inside him, and the betrayal had come from the one person he thought he could trust above all else. What followed was a decision that could only be made under urgent psychological protocol. He was to be transported to a psychiatric facility, not under his royal name, but as a private citizen suffering a mental health crisis. He was taken to a secure wing at a medical center known for treating high-profile individuals who require discretion, safety, and comprehensive care. His identity was protected. Few within the facility even knew who he was. Inside that medical wing, a very different kind of lockdown began. For 3 days, Harry was kept under psychiatric observation. He was assigned a clinical psychologist specializing in trauma and identity crises. The first 24 hours were nearly wordless. Harry responded in monosyllables, barely making eye contact. He took his meals but didn't eat much. He walked in the small garden behind the unit but avoided other patients. He sat beneath a tree, often tracing the same line on his palm over and over again with his thumb, a nervous tic that staff quietly noted. What was most concerning, according to the hospital's internal notes, was his emotional flatness. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even visibly sad. He was numb. When asked by a therapist to describe how he was feeling, he replied only, "I don't know if I feel anything anymore." This detachment, mental health experts would later say, is a hallmark of emotional burnout and identity fracture. When a person's entire self-concept is tied to a belief, and that belief is shattered, the psychological response can resemble that of a bereavement. And Harry, it seemed, was mourning something intangible, perhaps the loss of love, or the realization that the person he fought the world to be with might never have seen him as more than a brand. His days were quiet, structured. Therapy in the mornings. Short walks. Limited phone use. No media. His children were kept out of conversations, as were Meghan and the royal family. Instead, therapists worked on stabilizing his mental state, encouraging emotional vocabulary, drawing out his suppressed fears. Slowly, cracks appeared in the silence. By the second evening, he began to talk more. He asked about the news. He requested poetry, of all things, a book by Rainer Maria Rilke. One nurse recalled him sitting with the book open but unread. He stared at the page for hours. When asked what he was thinking, he said, "This is the first place in a long time I haven't had to perform." Those words marked a turning point. It wasn't just about a marital breakdown. It was about the unsustainable pressure of being Harry, the exile prince, the modern rebel, the trauma survivor, the global spokesperson for mental health, all roles that had become masks he wore for different audiences. In that quiet room, he was none of those. Just a man in pain, stripped of myth, titles, and illusions. The most revealing session came on day 3. According to a therapist's confidential summary, Harry spoke openly about the Montecito fight. He repeated Meghan's words aloud. He then paused, took a breath, and asked the therapist, "What does it mean if the one person you trusted tells you you're just a pawn?" The therapist did not answer. They didn't have to. Silence, in therapy, can say more than advice. Outside the facility, the world was speculating. Online tabloids speculated wildly. Conspiracy theories ballooned. Meghan remained silent publicly, but insiders claimed her private focus had shifted to brand damage control. Discussions reportedly began about how to spin the incident as a rest and recovery break for Harry rather than a psychiatric collapse. But those closest to Harry, including his UK-based security liaison, saw the truth. Harry wasn't resting. He was rebooting. Or, more accurately, he was deconstructing a version of himself that could no longer hold. The end of the 72-hour hold didn't mean a return to normal. It meant a choice. Harry could leave the facility. But the therapist recommended continued inpatient therapy or, at minimum, an intensive outpatient program. Surprisingly, Harry agreed. He stayed an additional 2 days voluntarily. No press. No visitors. No distractions. By the time he returned to the Montecito mansion, nothing had changed on the surface. The house was still pristine. The staff still formal. The children still giggled in the distance. But everything had changed for him. Meghan was there, but the reunion was muted. No embraces. No lengthy conversation. They spoke briefly. She left for another meeting that afternoon. Harry reportedly stood at the top of the stairs after she left, holding the railing for a long time, just looking down. It wasn't the sight of broken objects or police cars that marked the depth of Harry's breakdown. It was the stillness, the silence, the locked door behind which a man collapsed into the deepest recesses of despair without making a sound. That locked door wasn't just physical. It symbolized the mental walls he had been building for years against the palace, against the press, even against himself. But on that night, they all crumbled. And from behind those closed walls, Prince Harry finally let the world see the cost of carrying too much for too long. The SUV carrying Prince Harry to the psychiatric wing of the Los Angeles-affiliated facility moved quietly through the moonlit roads. No sirens, no flashing lights. Only the hum of tires on asphalt and the quiet voice of the bodyguard seated beside him, offering sparse words of reassurance. Harry sat slouched, his head against the window, barely reacting to anything outside. The sedative administered earlier had calmed his body, but his mind was elsewhere, disconnected, floating, frayed. This was not the first time the facility had handled a high-profile individual in crisis, but few patients came under such discreet circumstances. The hospital had a dedicated entrance for celebrity and political cases, no press, no nosy staff, no identifiers. Harry was booked under a pseudonym. His arrival was logged with the bare minimum of detail. Just a name, a note indicating acute stress, and a short instruction: priority privacy, high psychological risk. Inside, a team of professionals had already assembled. The overnight psychiatrist, a woman known for treating war veterans with PTSD, was briefed en route. The nurses were selected based on experience, temperament, and discretion. Not all knew exactly who their patient was, but those who did said nothing. The room Harry was placed in was private, facing a secluded garden courtyard. No television, no clock, neutral-colored walls. Every detail designed to be calming, without stimulus. When Harry arrived, he did not speak. He did not resist. He simply walked where he was told and lay down when asked. A nurse removed his shoes and covered him with a light blanket. The doctor asked if he was comfortable. He nodded faintly. That was the extent of his communication the first night. At around 3 a.m., the hospital's internal monitoring system, used for non-intrusive observation of patients in high-risk states, captured Harry rising from bed, pacing in a slow circle for almost an hour. He made no sound, just walked, one step after another, around the perimeter of the room. Occasionally, he would pause near the window and press his forehead to the glass, then continue walking. This ritual went on until sunrise. When the morning staff arrived, Harry was seated in the corner of the room, cross-legged, his eyes open but unfocused. A fresh team took over. They brought food, offered water, and attempted light conversation. Harry answered in single words or not at all. They noted his vital signs: blood pressure slightly elevated, heart rate within tolerable limits, body language guarded. It was clear this was not a panic attack. This was a full-system emotional shutdown. A comprehensive evaluation was scheduled later that morning. 2 psychiatrists and a trauma-informed therapist met with Harry in a quiet side room with glass walls, allowing for openness without claustrophobia. He was asked routine questions: his name, today's date, whether he knew where he was. He answered correctly, if reluctantly. When asked how he was feeling, he didn't answer at first. Then finally, he said, "I'm tired of pretending." That sentence became the starting point for the therapeutic approach. What followed were hours of intake and psychological mapping. Harry disclosed, in limited detail, past incidents of emotional distress. He referenced the loss of his mother, but only briefly. He mentioned the media, the pressure, the exile. He referenced being misunderstood. But most telling of all was how little he said about his wife. When asked if he felt safe at home, he didn't respond. When asked if he felt supported emotionally, he blinked slowly and said, "Sometimes I feel like a shadow." The medical team began to build a picture. This was not a man having a sudden reaction to a single incident. This was someone experiencing what professionals call cumulative trauma collapse, a state where years of emotional pain, suppression, and identity conflict implode in the face of one destabilizing event. The incident in Montecito had been that event, but it was merely the trigger, not the cause. Meghan's words had done damage, yes, but what brought Harry to this point was deeper: unresolved grief, identity loss, the fracture between duty and desire, the cultural whiplash of trading one life for another. He was a man between worlds, never fully belonging in either. Treatment focused on grounding him. Nurses engaged him in non-clinical conversation about music, books, the outdoors. He opened up slightly when asked about his military service. One nurse reported that his eyes lit up for a moment when describing life in the field. It was hard, but it made sense, he said. There were rules, codes. You knew who you were. That clarity, he admitted, had evaporated after moving to California. His schedule in the hospital became routine. Breakfast at 8 o'clock. Therapy at 10 o'clock. Mindfulness sessions at noon. Walks in the garden in the late afternoon. No media. No internet. Just the process of repair. Slowly, he began participating more actively in sessions. By the end of day 2, he began using full sentences again. He expressed shame for what he called emotional failure. His therapists assured him it was not a failure. They explained that his reaction was not abnormal given his life's trajectory and recent stressors. It wasn't until day 3 that he finally spoke about the argument. She said I was just a stepping stone, he told his therapist. She said I was weak. Like I was nothing more than a name. There was a long pause in the session after that. His voice had cracked, but he didn't cry. The therapist waited. Then Harry added, I think I believed that I was enough. That love would be enough. But now I don't know if I was ever really seen. That admission marked a crucial turning point. The conversation shifted from surface-level recounting to internal reckoning. They began to talk about identity, about what it meant to be Harry without the royal crest, without the uniform, without the expectations. They discussed the difference between being useful and being loved, between being adored and being understood. By the end of his 3rd day under observation, the recommendation was made for a short voluntary extension, not out of necessity, but as a space for healing. Harry agreed. He stayed 2 more nights, by his own choice. The doctors modified his sedation to allow for increased emotional clarity while maintaining calm. He was no longer silent, but he was not yet stable enough to resume public life. On the 5th day, Harry requested a meeting with his therapist outside the facility garden. It was a rare request and typically discouraged for patients still under evaluation, but they agreed. They walked slowly, past hedges and fountains, out of sight of any building. He spoke about his children. They're the only thing that makes me feel anchored. When I see Archie, I remember why I left everything. When I see Lily, I just want her to grow up without the confusion I feel. He also spoke about Meghan. Not with anger, but with confusion. I don't know what's real anymore, he said. Sometimes I think she believes in us. Sometimes I think I was just a chapter she needed to get to the next. The therapist reminded him that identity entanglement is common in high-stress relationships. Harry was learning that his role in someone else's story didn't have to define his self-worth. Even if you were used, the therapist said gently, you are still worthy of healing. Not because of your title, but because you are human. The next morning, Harry was discharged. He was given a prescription for ongoing therapy, mild anxiety medication, and a list of outpatient clinics for continued care. He walked out of the facility under light security, escorted by the same bodyguard who had stood by his side that long night in Montecito. Returning to the mansion felt foreign. The place was the same, but Harry was not. His mind had been cracked open and slowly reassembled, but the scars were still fresh. Meghan was home. Their exchange upon his arrival was brief. Sources say she offered a soft greeting, a concerned look, a short embrace. Then she left again for a lunch meeting. Harry spent the rest of that day alone. By evening, he was seen walking barefoot on the lawn, hands in his pockets, looking out toward the horizon as the sun set over the Pacific. He stood there for nearly 20 minutes. Staff watched quietly from a distance. He said nothing, then turned, walked inside, and shut the door behind him. No locks this time. But the weight behind the silence remained. When the news of Prince Harry's hospitalization reached Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere shifted immediately from routine to crisis mode. The royal family, accustomed to managing public relations disasters with a carefully choreographed blend of silence and subtle statements, found themselves scrambling to contain an internal emergency that threatened not only Harry's health but the very image of the monarchy. The initial reaction among senior royals was a complex mixture of concern, frustration, and uncertainty. King Charles, who was at the time attending a private retreat at Balmoral, was reportedly informed by his private secretary via an encrypted phone call late in the evening. The gravity of the situation was conveyed swiftly, but the response was cautious, an instinct honed over decades of media scrutiny and political maneuvering. Charles's immediate worry was for his son's well-being, but also for the potential fallout. The monarchy had weathered scandals before, but this was deeply personal. According to an insider, Charles was distressed and somewhat remorseful, reflecting privately on whether his own strained relationship with Harry had contributed to the crisis. The king's advisors urged him to maintain a firm public front, emphasizing privacy and respect for Harry's recovery. Prince William's reaction was even more charged. The elder brother, already bearing the weight of future kingship, found himself torn between familial loyalty and the immense pressure to uphold the institution's dignity. Upon hearing the news, William reportedly convened an urgent meeting with his closest aides and security team at Kensington Palace. His call to Harry's medical team was described by a palace source as brief but deeply emotional. William's voice, usually measured and composed, was said to carry both shock and a plea for reconciliation. Despite the estrangement between the brothers, William made it clear he was ready to support Harry's recovery, though with a cautious, measured approach. A senior palace official said, "William understands the stakes. This is more than a family matter, it's a national concern." Meanwhile, Camilla, Queen Consort, and Kate, Duchess of Cambridge, were also briefed. Camilla's response was described as quiet but resolute, advocating for the family to rally around Harry without public commentary. Kate was reportedly deeply upset, seen in private moments reflecting on the fragility of mental health and the impact of public life. Both women's interactions with their respective households suggested an internal call for solidarity, even as the family navigated decades of complex relationships and tensions. In the days following Harry's admission, Buckingham Palace adopted a strict media blackout. No official statements were released. Press officers were instructed to dismiss queries with a no comment and to remind journalists of the family's commitment to privacy. The palace's silence was calculated, breaking it risked opening the floodgates of speculation and intrusive coverage. Behind closed doors, however, the response was anything but silent. The palace communications team assembled an emergency task force, including legal advisors, public relations experts, and security consultants. Their primary objective was to manage the narrative, both to protect Harry's dignity and to prevent the incident from escalating into a constitutional crisis or media frenzy. The task force monitored social media closely, tracking hashtags, rumors, and emerging stories. They liaised with U.S. security and media operatives to control leaks and limit unauthorized disclosures. Some staff were reportedly briefed on confidentiality agreements with severe penalties for breaches. At the same time, there was intense internal discussion about whether to intervene directly in Harry and Meghan's situation. Some senior figures advocated for a private family visit or mediated dialogue, hoping to mend fences and reassure Harry of the family's support. Others feared that involvement could backfire, especially given the recent history of public disputes and media leaks. Prince Andrew, currently living in semi-retirement amidst ongoing controversies, was reportedly asked to stay out of the matter entirely, to avoid further complicating the family's already fragile standing. King Charles ultimately made the decision to send a trusted intermediary to contact Harry discreetly, someone with whom Harry still had a cordial relationship, capable of offering personal support without media fanfare. This envoy was tasked with gauging Harry's condition, encouraging open communication, and facilitating any logistical needs for his recovery. William's camp, however, maintained a degree of skepticism about Harry's long-term plans and commitment to healing. Leaks to the press from palace insiders hinted at a divide between the brothers, with William urging caution and Harry's side calling for understanding and patience. While the palace navigated this complex web of personal and political considerations, the public remained largely in the dark. Speculation ran rampant, fueled by anonymous sources and tabloids eager for headlines. Yet, Buckingham Palace's official restraint underscored a deep cultural shift. Mental health, once taboo within the royal narrative, was now undeniable and unavoidable. This silent but strategic crisis management extended to the royal household staff. Guards, aides, and attendants received briefings on maintaining confidentiality and were instructed to report any unusual media activity immediately. Security protocols around royal residences were heightened, not only to protect the family from potential paparazzi incursions but also to shield the fragile emotional state of those affected. At Clarence House, King Charles's personal residence, advisors prepared for the possibility of public addresses or statements, drafting language that balanced compassion with duty. There was acknowledgement that eventually, some form of acknowledgement would be necessary to quell rumors and reassure the public. In parallel, Buckingham Palace reached out informally to representatives of Meghan Markle. Despite the couple's estrangement from the palace, there was a shared understanding that coordination was essential in controlling the narrative and supporting Harry's well-being. Meghan's response, however, was reported as guarded. While she expressed concern privately through intermediaries, her public silence and separate media appearances complicated palace efforts to present a unified front. As days turned to weeks, the royal family's focus shifted toward recovery and repair, both personal and public. The hospitalization was a turning point that forced everyone to confront uncomfortable realities: the fragility of mental health, the consequences of fractured relationships, and the limits of public endurance. Ultimately, the palace's strategy was clear: maintain privacy, support Harry quietly, and prepare for a future where mental health is openly acknowledged but royal dignity is preserved. This crisis, while deeply personal, had become a mirror reflecting the changing dynamics of the monarchy in the 21st century, a family caught between tradition and transparency, resilience and vulnerability, silence and disclosure. The phrase, "You were just my stepping stone to Hollywood power," echoed far beyond the walls of the Montecito mansion. It wasn't simply a harsh rebuke. It was a crystallization of a deeper, more complicated narrative playing out behind the carefully curated public personas of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. To truly understand the gravity of that moment, it is essential to examine both the hidden meanings behind Meghan's words and the public mask she has worn throughout their relationship. Meghan Markle, for many, is a figure of empowerment, a woman who broke into the royal family from a Hollywood background, carving a path with confidence and determination. Yet, the truth behind the public image reveals layers of ambition, strategic calculation, and complex interpersonal dynamics. Those who have observed her rise closely describe a woman who is both fiercely protective of her brand and acutely aware of the power structures she navigates. The phrase, "stepping stone," implies a transactional relationship, one in which Harry was a means to an end rather than an equal partner. It evokes a cold, utilitarian view of their marriage, where affection and loyalty were secondary to ambition and advancement. For Harry, this suggestion was devastating, not only because of what it said about his personal worth, but because it questioned the very foundation of their union. To analyze the meaning behind those words, one must consider Meghan's own history and aspirations. Before meeting Harry, she was a moderately successful actress on Suits, a show popular but hardly iconic. Her public profile was growing, but she had not yet crossed into the elite echelons of global celebrity. Marrying a British prince instantly elevated her status to global royalty, opening doors to influential networks, philanthropy, and media ventures far beyond Hollywood's entertainment industry. Yet, Meghan was not content to merely bask in royal limelight. Her subsequent actions demonstrated an eagerness to build an independent brand, often emphasizing her activism, entrepreneurial ventures, and storytelling projects. Documentaries, podcasts, and interviews became vehicles for shaping a narrative about her life and values. To some insiders, this appeared less as a personal journey and more as a deliberate strategy to establish influence and control. Critics argue that this drive sometimes came at the expense of genuine emotional connection. According to palace sources, Meghan's relationships within the family were often transactional, measured by utility rather than intimacy. Conversations with senior staff hinted at a pattern of managing relationships for benefit, rather than building trust. While Meghan's supporters framed this as savvy navigation of a patriarchal institution, detractors saw it as cold calculation. When Meghan told Harry he was a stepping stone, she may have been exposing a truth unspoken, a recognition that their marriage was as much about mutual advancement as love. In Hollywood terms, it was a power couple arrangement. Harry brought royal pedigree and a troubled but famous narrative. Meghan brought media savvy and Hollywood connections. Together, they were more than the sum of their parts. But this arrangement was precarious. The pressures of public expectation, media scrutiny, and personal ambition created fault lines. When one partner feels used or undervalued, resentment can fester. Harry's mental health struggles, exacerbated by isolation and estrangement, contrasted with Meghan's public confidence and expanding platform. This disparity may have deepened the chasm between them. Yet Meghan's public mask was carefully constructed to project strength and unity. Throughout interviews, social media, and public appearances, she emphasized themes of partnership, resilience, and shared purpose. She portrayed their relationship as a refuge from the harshness of royal life and media persecution. Her narrative was one of survival and empowerment. Behind the scenes, however, multiple reports suggest a more complex dynamic. Sources close to the couple have described Meghan as controlling in private, often making unilateral decisions on their media projects and charitable efforts. While Harry supported her publicly, he reportedly felt sidelined and unheard. Staff recall tense meetings where Meghan's vision dominated, leaving little room for dissent. Psychological analyses of such dynamics reveal the strain caused when one partner's ambitions eclipse the other's needs. The stress of maintaining a public front while navigating private conflicts can lead to emotional exhaustion, as was evident in Harry's breakdown. Meghan's harsh words may have been a manifestation of deeper frustrations and power struggles within the marriage. Furthermore, Meghan's words can be seen as a reflection of broader societal themes, particularly the complexities of race, class, and identity in the royal context. As a biracial American woman entering a centuries-old British institution, Meghan faced unique challenges. Navigating those challenges may have necessitated adopting a strategic persona, one willing to assert power boldly, sometimes at personal cost. Public opinion remains divided. Many admire Meghan's courage in challenging tradition and advocating for mental health and racial justice. Others criticize her perceived opportunism in the disruption she is believed to have caused within the royal family. This dichotomy underscores the polarizing nature of her image. The media's role in shaping Meghan's public mask cannot be overstated. British tabloids, in particular, have launched sustained campaigns painting her in a negative light, often amplifying unverified allegations and personal conflicts. This media pressure contributed to the couple's decision to step back from royal duties and relocate to the United States. In interviews, Meghan has spoken about the psychological toll of this media onslaught. Yet, simultaneously, she has harnessed media platforms to advance her own story and brand. This duality, both victim and architect of narrative, adds to the complexity of understanding her role in the marriage and Harry's subsequent emotional crisis. Experts in celebrity psychology note that maintaining such a public mask requires immense emotional labor and can lead to isolation. The need to control perception often conflicts with genuine vulnerability, leading to internal conflicts that may explain some of Meghan's private harshness. Ultimately, Meghan's words to Harry serve as a painful indictment of their relationship's fragility and the competing forces of love, ambition, and survival. They expose the contradictions inherent in their marriage, between public unity and private discord, between emotional connection and strategic calculation. As the public continues to watch, the challenge remains to see beyond the masks and headlines to the human realities underneath. Understanding Meghan's words requires acknowledging both the empowerment and the wounds that shape her journey, and the toll this has taken on Prince Harry. Tonight, explosive new details reveal how Meghan Markle's devastating words pushed Prince Harry to the brink, locked away in a bathroom for hours, eventually sedated and rushed to the hospital. In this video, we uncover the intense argument that shook the Sussex household to its core. A confrontation witnessed by a staff member, where Meghan allegedly mocked Harry's mental health and called him weak. We'll dive into the emotional fallout that terrified the royal family, explore what really led to Harry's shocking breakdown, and expose the secrets behind this crisis that could change everything. Stay tuned as we peel back the layers behind the headlines in a story no one saw coming.